your hands on top of your head.
Well, I didn't.
Now!
And I'll bet your mother had a loud bark.
Good morning. This is Morning Coffee with the Chief. I am your host, Patrick Jordan, retired law enforcement. On this show, we go over a law enforcement or crime-related movie, and we analyze the movie, talk about our own experiences, and talk about what's going on today. You know, I am feeling a little under the weather here, so bear with me as we get through the show. They always say, the show must go on, and that's what we will do today. Thank you for Penny for saying good morning to us this morning. I see you in the chats and everybody else that's joining us. So today I have a great show. I have we're going to do a true story in cold blood. And I have a great homicide investigator with me today. I was going to have two, but the second guy suffered a tragedy in his family, so he couldn't join us today. But before I get into our show and before I introduce our guests, I just want to remind you guys to look up the Los Angeles Mission, losangelesmission.org, and make a donation. They are getting ready for Thanksgiving. They normally do a big Thanksgiving dinner the day before Thanksgiving with all the trimmings for the people who live on Skid Row. They use that as an opportunity to do outreach to see if any of those guys want to get off the street. And they need your help. They are not funded by government. They are faith-based, and so anything you can do to help at losangelesmission.org will help them meet the needs of the homeless on Skid Row and treat them to a nice holiday dinner. Now, this show is a little bit of a special. We are talking about a true life story with two evil men, but I have some other things to talk about. I wanted to dedicate this show to Ryan Klinkenbrummer. Ryan is he was murdered on September 16th, just a few days ago, and he is the son of a friend of mine. His dad worked with me for several years. He is the third generation police officer, and he was murdered up in Palmdale, California, which is in Los Angeles County. And I want to dedicate this show to him and to the men and women in law enforcement who put their life on the line every single day. These tragedies do happen, and fortunately, they caught the suspect. He was ambushed while he was riding. He was in his car. This was not provoked in any way. He was just murdered because he wore the uniform. And our thoughts go out and prayers go out to the family of Ryan, and we wish them all the best. I will, when I get a chance in the chat, I will put a place where you can make a donation if you want to make a donation. But today's show is dedicated to Ryan Klinkenbrummer. Also, I wanted to talk about the murder of a chaplain right along. It's Bruce Bryan. This occurred about 30 years ago. Now, I was there that night. I was a field sergeant and responded to the call of a deputy down. And basically what had happened was the chaplain here was riding along with the deputy, Deputy Terry Winger, in Carson City, California. And he took a guy who was causing a lot of problems home. Instead of taking him to jail, he said, "Hey, I'm just going to take you home." The guy was a little problematic, but he thought, let me just drop this guy off and we can get back to work, because it was a busy Friday night. And he wouldn't let the guy out of the car. When he let the suspect out of the car, the suspect sucker punched the deputy. Deputy went down, was knocked unconscious. He pulled the deputy's gun out of his holster, shot at the deputy, eventually hit him in the face and blew off half his face, and the deputy lost an eye. Miraculously, the deputy survived, but he was maimed for life. After shooting the deputy and believing that he killed the deputy, he turned the gun on chaplain Bruce Bryan. So he's a police chaplain, and started shooting at him. The chaplain got out of the car and eventually went down, and Derek Eugene Pettis stood over him and executed him. So I have a link under Brian's picture here, and it is to oppose the parole of Derek Eugene Pettis. The parole board approved the parole on September 6th, but there's a 120-day period in which the public can comment. Please do me a favor, take down the information here. It'll also be in the comments as well. Go to this link and give Derek Pettis's name with his CDC number, and tell the governor of California, Governor Gavin Newsom, that you oppose Derek Pettis's parole. He's an evil guy. He did evil things. He killed the deputy sheriff who was helpless, and then shot an unarmed police chaplain. I think he needs to stay in prison because he's an evil guy. Talking about evil guys, now we need to get into our movie, right? So this movie, In Cold Blood, I have a great guest with me today, and he's a former homicide investigator, and he's been on the show before, and you know him, and his name is Danny R. Smith. We can bring up Danny, and Danny, he worked homicide for LA County Sheriff for a long time. I'm sure the dedication and the story about the Carson shooting is something that Danny is familiar with and pays attention to, and has been through. But I thought Danny, and we were going to have another homicide investigator on, but he couldn't be on. Would be great to talk about the murder of the Clutter family in Kansas in 1959, and the two suspects involved in the murder, the subsequent book written by Truman Capote, and the movie that was released in 1967. Danny, thanks for being with me. What did you think of the dedication and, of course, opposing the parole of Derek Pettis?
Thanks, Chief, for having me on. I always enjoy being on your show as a guest. And, the start of this show is pretty heavy, man. I mean, I hope we're going to have to shift gears and move toward the movie. But man, it's been a tough couple weeks especially for us LA sheriffs, alumni, because we've lost a lot of really good guys in the last couple weeks. I'm sure that you've been friends and partners with some of the people who have passed away, and then the deputy or the murder of the deputy, and of course anytime those things happen, it just, everything that we've experienced throughout our careers just comes back to us, because there's been so many deputies who have been killed, and we deal with that, and all of that comes back, and it just makes it tough. So thanks for that dedication, Em. I think that was great. As far as the parole thing, I still, retired 19 years now, I still attend parole hearings, and it's amazing to me that California especially is just so anxious to release these people back into society who are nothing but predators, evil people who had their day in court and were given a sentence, and then California just wants to pretend that that's not the case. Let them out, let them go be predators again. It's just it's horrible. And I think it does matter for everyone to voice their opinion, to send respectful, professional correspondence to the state and to the governor and say, please do not do this. And I'll do my part.
So one of the things that came up in this Derek Pettis thing is they had this youthful offender status. So if you were under 18, you couldn't give life without parole, right? And the California bumped that to 23 years old, and then they bumped it to 26. Derek Pettis was 24 when he committed the murder of the police chaplain, and so now he's eligible. And that's the frustrating. They keep changing the goalposts, and the idea behind it, and the public needs to understand this. The idea behind the youthful offender notion is that they say that a person's brain is not fully formed by the time they're 23. First it was 23, now it's 26, and that's the reason why we shouldn't punish them as harshly, because the youthful indiscretion or inability to understand what they're doing. Now, I don't agree with that. I mean, we hire police officers at 21. We put people in the military at 18. We give them the right to vote at 18. We give them the right to drink at 21. But we're not going to hold them accountable for the violent acts that they commit. And so it opens the doors for people like Derek Pettis to get out. And so, in addition to opposing his parole, I think you ought to comment about this youthful offender release, and pay attention. These things are happening in Sacramento without us really even knowing about it, because they do it so quietly. Nobody opposes it. And also in LA County, Gascon, the DA, the Soros-funded DA, does not oppose parole anymore. His office does not oppose any parole. In fact, he didn't even notice. But I talked to the deputy involved, Terry Winger. He said he was not even noticed that the guy was released. So that's how little the DA's office in LA does for the victims, in my opinion. But that is heavy. But it does lead into a very heavy story in cold blood. This is about two killers, a true story about two killers. And this occurred, the murder actually occurred on November 15th, 1969. And the movie itself was released, it's called In Cold Blood. It was released in 1967. It's an American neo-noir crime film written, produced and directed by Richard Brooks, but it's based upon the novel by Truman Capote, and he wrote that book in 1966. And it was probably I would probably argue it was probably his biggest hit, meaning it got the most attention. Hands down.
Hands down, yeah.
And I think before we get into the movie and what happened in the movie, I really want to say that Capote developed relationships with these guys as he did research for his book, and he tended to humanize them in the book. And some folks said they really didn't like the movie because they felt it was an anti-death penalty movie. And he goes back into what happened in the youth, and particularly with Perry. It's Perry Smith. That's our main suspect here, portrayed by Richard Blake here, and our Robert Blake. And he goes back and looks at it, and he develops a fondness for these guys, even though they're killers. And I just have this thought, and I've said it before, and I'll get your thoughts on it, and then we'll start getting into the movies. Is there are a lot of people who suffer as kids and young men and young women who don't go on to become killers. In fact, I suspect the vast majority who suffered similar backgrounds as these two suspects, or other people who've gone on to kill, do not go on to kill themselves. In fact, the vast majority of them find a way to live a good life. And so seeing those as mitigating factors for me, I struggle with that, because, well, you had choices. To say you didn't have free will to do what you did because of your background, and to my mind, I just don't agree with that. I don't know what you think of that, Danny. I think a lot of people turn their lives around and don't go down the dark path, but these guys chose to go down that dark path.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And the fact that Capote developed these relationships, it just made the book that much better. It was, it's when you asked me to be on the show, I was like, oh, great. I love, I've read the book several times, absolutely loved it. Never saw the movie until you invited me on, and I watched it over the weekend. But it was such a classic blockbuster. It was the first book they called a true crime novel, and of course, novel is supposed to be a fiction, but and the reason they did that is because he took a lot of artistic liberty with some of the conversations and some of the things that occurred that he couldn't know for certain. So he used some, again, artistic license to create this book. He called it a true crime novel, and so it was a phenomenal book. The movie, and I'm one of those guys as an author, and a reader. The movies are never as good as the book, right? But I thought the movie did a pretty dang good job. As far as movies go, I thought it did a pretty good job.
Well, I was just going to ask you that question, but also this sparked a kind of a new a new way of writing about crime, right? I forget what they called it, but they coined a phrase on writing uh, true fiction, I guess. It's true story where you're adding some fictionalized accounts in there just to make the story, right? And he's also a very interesting character, Truman Capote himself, kind of this high Southern voice, an avant-garde kind of aloof kind of persona. I mean, I've seen him on TV before, and I go, okay, this guy's a character, but he did humanize these guys. People didn't like that. To me, the evil acts really you can humanize them all you want. They did some really evil stuff, but the actors in here were also very good. Robert Blake. I wouldn't say I'm a fan of him personally. I think he's a train wreck as a person. I mean, he was accused of killing his wife. I'm not sure whether he did or not. He was acquitted, so I guess he'd say he's considered innocent. But he was also found responsible for her death in a civil court. So a little different evidentiary standard there, but he was held responsible. He ended up having to declare bankruptcy. And I think it kind of destroyed the rest of his career there. But also, Scott Wilson. Oh, I have to go back. Blake does play a really good bad guy because this isn't the only film he played a bad guy in. He plays a really sinister bad guy. But Scott Wilson, who played Dick Hickok, the other bad guy in this movie. Now, I saw him. I just started watching the series Bosch. I hadn't been watching it. Somebody said you need to watch that. So my wife and I are on the first season, and he's in that movie. I mean, he's in that show. So I recognized him. Oh, that's that guy from In Cold Blood, and I also recognized him from in the Walking Dead series. I binged watched that I think during COVID, and he had a pretty good part in that, and I liked him. They both did a really good job. And John Forsythe, I remember him from some old movies. So those are the names I mostly remembered in the movie. But I believe that both Robert Blake and Scott Wilson as the bad guys here, they did a really good job portraying the bad guys. I don't know if they captured the essence of those guys' personalities from the book. Danny, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I thought the movie was good. I thought the actors did a great job, and I can kind of see what you're talking about. How some people thought that he, kind of humanized the bad guys, but the truth is, I mean, they are human. They're flawed, and as a former homicide detective, I can relate to that because I've sat across the table from many, many, many killers, and you have to. Yeah, I mean, I think about what Capote did in creating this book. He had to have a relationship. Well, when you sit down to interview or interrogate a killer, you have the same burden. You have to put everything else aside and take this person as a human first and foremost, and develop a rapport with them. So, I don't have a problem that he did it. I think it was brilliant actually, and I don't think that we would have ever had as much of that story had he not.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I mean, my minimal time as an investigator and having to talk to people. Yeah, you have to get them to trust you and relate to you, or try to relate to them so they give you more information. And yes, Martine Herschel is the name of the guy I believe in The Walking Dead that was in this movie as well. So, let's get into the first scene, and this is. I'm sorry, we should. So, Partners in Crime is the first scene, but we'll show this, and this is, the first part of this movie. They really kind of introduce all the characters, right? So we got Robert Blake's character Perry Smith, and he's looking to meet up with Dick Hickok and to do some big score, whatever that score is. Now he doesn't know what it is now, and he's kind of it kind of gives flashbacks. He's struggling, right? He also tries to reach out to his the reverend at the prison and to find out what's going on with Hickok. And the guy is trying to tell him, you shouldn't be in Kansas because part of his parole was that you can't go back to Kansas. And this takes place in Holcomb, Kansas, and he's meeting his partner in crime in Kansas City, Kansas. and you can just see, just watch his whole demeanor, that he's a little out there, but also one of the other big aspects of this is he's got an injury, some kind of injury, and in the book or in the movie, I think he feels inadequate because of this injury and other things that have transpired in his life. So they're introducing Perry, and then they eventually introduce Hickok as well, and then they in the meantime they also are interlacing the so here those two of them are meeting in Kansas City at the train station, but they also interlace the family, the Clutter family in these initial scenes, so you get to know uh, what you're dealing with. And the Clutter family, God-fearing family. Four people are in the house when this murder happens. They're a farming family. They own a large farm in the flatlands of Kansas, and their goal is they think that Mr. Clutter here has a bunch of money and a safe in his house, and that's what their score is going to be. So I kind of wanted to, can we show a picture of the Clutter family, or Martine, and so we can see who we're talking about in terms of the Clutters. And so here's the Clutters, and a God-fearing family. I think Kenyon there was 14, Nancy was 16 when this happened, and there's Bonnie and Herb Clutter. So these are the people that were basically they were annihilated by these two guys just for a score. And 10,000, I guess, would have been a lot of money back in 1959. Doesn't seem like it's worth it now. And they pretty much came away with nothing. So I wanted to hit you up, Danny, about forming relationships in prison and then coming out as crime partners. I don't know if you ever dealt with a case like that. I remember, was it Lawrence Bittaker and those guys that were doing, these were these guys that were serial killers that were terrorizing the Sunset Strip and kidnapping women and torturing them. I remember that crew coming out of prison and doing that. Did you ever deal with a crew of guys coming out and committing murders or crimes that led to murders, and form those relationships well in prison?
I don't think that I ever specifically had a case where partners had first met in prison, but the theme of the show is very timely in that that again the parole system, quite frankly, is flawed. When you've got people who have been convicted, and especially if they've been convicted of violent crimes, they need to serve their full sentences and then be closely monitored when they're released, if they're released, because these guys are predators, and they're not going to just fit back into society in the bulk of cases. I mean, there are exceptions, but the majority of offenders go on to commit additional crimes once they're released from prison. I think the statistics have proven that.
Well, have you had cases where there were crime partners and there's one is more leading? Because in the initial stages, it appears Hickok is kind of leading Perry, right? He
Yeah,
seems to be the leader in this. And because I found that whenever we're dealing with groups of people, there's usually one that's more charismatic, and they're following them, and
I
they're followers.
what I kept thinking about while watching this movie was I think the last time I was on the show when we did the Onion Field.
Yeah.
I kept thinking about those two, and the relationship that they had, and it was very similar to the relationship that Smith and Hickok had in this show, or in this case in real life, also.
Well, I think the other thing is I mean, just the way in the letter, he sent him a letter and he used words like honey. I mean, endearing terms, which was really odd to me. And I thought, well, did these guys have some kind of
That's what
relationship?
I wondered too. He
You know
calls
what
him
I mean?
honey, baby, sweetheart, I think even.
Sweetheart,
So yeah,
honey.
yeah.
And I mean, I don't know if the book explores whether they had a intimate relationship or not, but I certainly come away with that. And later on, when the murders happen, I think, I always felt when I watched the movie there was some kind of jealousy going on when Hickok expressed interest in Nancy, right? But hey, let's show a picture of these guys. Our killers, Perry and Dick. I think we got a picture of them here. And Martine, you there?
Yes, I am
Can we
here.
picture of Perry Smith and Dick Hickok? Let's see if we got a picture of those guys. Throw it up there for the audience to see. And one was I think late 20s. The other one was 31. And then you could just follow that up with, when you get the pictures, the picture of Perry
Yeah.
Smith and Truman Capote. Because Truman Capote is a kind of a short guy too, if I remember correctly. Yeah, here we go. So there's Dick Hickok and Perry Smith, young men. Maybe they should have been a little longer. And the thing about parole is, we have so much technology. We could track these guys a lot better than we used to, than 1959. So there isn't any reason why, if we did release them, they couldn't be tracked more effectively. But they pull funding away from that. They don't want them. They just want to give them a chance. Let's see. We got from Slasherfield. Do you think that Cold Blood was the first movie to have burglars because there were other movies panic movies, and with Forrest Whitaker and the classic this is, all I know is this is about a true story of some really brutal, nasty people that you don't want to meet down a dark alley. So this is then. Let's get the picture of Perry and Truman Capote, and it seems like Truman Capote tended to have a little more of a relationship, or there he is. There's Truman Capote. This guy would be a victim of Perry if it was out of custody, in my mind. So that's who our main guys are. That's who we're talking about. And go ahead and flip into buying supplies. So one of the things I noticed is, Danny, as I did the movie, is a lot of the things that you see in a regular crime, a planned homicide, because he's already talking about, we're going to kill these guys. That's what he's already said that in his letter, right? Which is crazy.
Yeah, no witnesses.
No witnesses. They've already indicated that.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, that's your premeditation right there. No matter how you slice it, this wasn't spur of the moment. Let's kill them. And then they're buying their supplies to do these murders, right? And which is really what happens, right? I mean, you get a murder like this, you look to see what they did beforehand to get to prepare for the crime and the murders. That indicates premeditation. Is that accurate? Something you saw in your cases?
Oh, absolutely. There's everything that they did, all of their actions leading up to the night they went into the home. It's all a long series of premeditation. And interestingly, because they were convicted and put to death, the thing that I found extremely interesting was, back then it only took 5 years, before they were put to death. And when they show in the movie, they show them being hung, and I thought, that's certainly a crime deterrent. We don't have a deterrent anymore. Even death penalty cases, at least in California, they never put anyone to death. So
they didn't even have a chance to get gray hairs, as
no.
two of us, right? So
yeah.
Well, but these are the things, when they do things like this, these are the things that an investigator looks for to show the premeditation, to show that what the true intent of what they're going to do. When they try to lie and diminish and mitigate, you look at, well, what did they do beforehand? I mean, in this case, one, they met. If you could find the letter, you would use the letter. They drove 400 miles, because this is 400. Holcomb, Kansas was 400 miles from Kansas City. So they drove all that way. And then they stopped at a store before getting to the Clutter farm to buy supplies to be able to tie these folks up and restrain them. And I don't know if I think they brought the knife and gun with them. So they brought the gun with them from their
correct
from their father, from Hickok's family's home, to do this crime. So they did all these things, and that lays out the intent that, one, they were going to commit the robbery, and they were likely going to kill the Clutters. And those are the things you look for, right?
Right. Yeah, no doubt about it. That's how you build the evidence and go into court with a airtight case that says no, this didn't happen for any other reason than that they had planned to commit a robbery and they had planned to conceal their crime by killing the witnesses.
And part of these scenes, they do start talking about these guys' background, that at least that Perry Smith was in the system. He was in orphanages, and he has an aversion to nuns. He doesn't like nuns. And you notice how, like, at the train station, they had some nuns there, and he pulled away. And then in this small town, they had nuns. And when did I go to Catholic schools? Let's see, I started in, I guess, 67, and the old habits were gone. Right now is a much more relaxed. Vatican II had happened, and it was much more relaxed, and you didn't have these habits. But he's seeing them, and for him, it's bad. And I wonder, well, how much of that is Capote taking editorial license on this, and how much of it is true? But that's so he's flashing back and suggesting that the nuns were bad. They looked over you. They beat you for peeing your bed or that kinds of stuff. And he says that, and it also comes up there. He's having a conversation with Dick, and Dick says, "Sure, baby," right? Which, God, that is so odd to me today, right? I guess unless you're in some kind of intimate relationship with a guy, that just tells me there's a lot more going on with these two guys than we know. Do you agree with that?
Well, yeah, and a couple of your listeners, I've seen a couple of messages pop up where they've talked about the manipulation of that language, and that's what it is. And again, that relationship between those two, where Hickok was clearly the manipulator, and I do agree with your listeners who have commented on that he's absolutely manipulating Perry Smith, and it's an odd thing, but you can see it happening, and I agree with that.
Yeah, so maybe he recognizes, because they're all, I think people need to understand who's in jail and prison. It's a bunch of manipulators.
Exactly.
There are a lot. These are people who have manipulating and taking advantage of others for decades, and some people are better at it than other, and they manipulate crime partners, which is what I kind of inferred in the beginning. You're going to have somebody who's a little better in getting people to go along. And I think even and Perry Smith is just looking for somebody to be connected with. He has no family, no connections, and he's, for whatever reason, he's latched onto Dick, and he made it very clear that was a very important relationship to him when he was talking to the clergy guy from the prison. That Dick was very important to him, which implies an intimate relationship, but it certainly implies a kind of, I guess, a familial bond, for lack of a better word. So yeah, it's Mighty Orbis talking about manipulation and maybe tricking a crime partner into to doing something, because even Perry Smith, you can tell he's having some reluctance, right, on this thing. He's questioning some of this stuff along the way, but he's not stopping, right? Which is,
yeah.
Then that's typical in crime partner. You're going to have one crime partner says, we shouldn't have did this, but he went along anyways, right? Have you faced that?
Yeah, and in this show, he actually Perry Smith goes out to the car at some point when he starts realizing there's no safe, there's no money, and he goes out to the car, and he's clearly upset, and he's processing this.
Yeah,
and he also was well aware of Dick's his propensity to assault women. Like, I mean, there's been several little incidents that have occurred, and it always upsets Perry that happens, which also kind of makes you wonder about the relationship and the intimacy of that relationship. But he goes out to the car, and he's clearly thinking about and processing this, and the viewer is thinking, well, man, he's just going to leave and leave his crime partner behind, but he doesn't.
nope.
It's almost like he shifts gears and thinks, okay, got to do what we got to do, and he goes back in with the shotgun, and my understanding is, he's the one that started the killing.
Yeah, yes, but even back that he knows this is a problem because remember when they were in the store buying supplies
Right.
and Dick reaches over and he rips off, I think it was some razor blades, and Perry realizes, yeah, I'm with an idiot. We're going to go and commit murder, or probably murder, some robbery. We have guns in the car. Why would you steal a low cost item? And he says, oh, just because you have to do it, baby. I think that's where he calls him baby, just because you have to do it, baby. And I'm like, and he's right. Is he should, this is where you go, this is where you turn around and say, okay, I'm not doing anything with you because you're dumb. I'm gonna get caught with you just because you do stupid
Right.
things like this. But
Yeah.
he's like on he's on a train, and it's going in one direction and there ain't no stopping, right? That's what
Yeah.
it seemed like to me with these guys. Hey, let's go on to the next scene, perfect partner, because this also brings up why would Dick, other than maybe he has an easy time of it manipulating Perry Smith, why would he pick him? And basically the story is that he tells Dick that he had murdered somebody in Las Vegas. He beat him to death, I think, with a bicycle chain or whatever it was, over an argument. And I did some research. I could not find that he was charged or that they thought he was responsible for another murder. And I'm talking Perry Smith prior to this, but Hickok thought he was, and because of that, he wanted him along on this job. Now, I still think they have an intimate relationship, and that's the other reason why he wanted him involved. But he also thought that he could carry his weight in killing people when that time came, and which is unusual. Normally, the killer is the guy that's leading the other folks, but that's so I don't know. In the book, did they talk about a previous murder by Perry at all? Did they validate whether that happened or not, or it was just
I don't recall because it's been quite a while since I've read that book, even though I've read it a few times, and I don't remember. I do recall that of course they have that part of the theme where Hickok believes, regardless if it was true or not, or just something that Smith might have told him in prison, to kind of to get his credibility, his street cred or whatever. But yeah, that there was a part of this where Hickok believes that Smith is a killer, and he even mentions it once or twice, where he tells him, "Hey, tell me that story again about when you killed that." And he uses um, you know a word we don't want to use, but he says, "Tell me about that. I love that story, or I like that story." And the way he said it the one time, I almost thought maybe he doesn't actually really believe that story, and he's kind of setting him up to let's prove your, let's see if you really got what it takes. I don't know. It's interesting.
Yeah, testing him, so to speak. But
Yeah.
he also alluded to that he had kind of an explosive temper, that Perry Smith had kind of an explosive temper. So that he had seen that in jail. And anyways, and he also said something about them being together. All we need is a ring, baby. Or how do you say it? Sugar. He calls him sugar. Again, this intimate relationship.
Right.
Hey, all we need is a ring, sugar. So. And like I said, I remember when I watched this movie years ago, and I go, God, these guys, they love each other. They're in I felt they were in a sexual relationship when I watched this. I think I watched this movie 30 years ago, and then I was just trying to think. I know 50s, 60s, there was a little bit different use of language, but I still feel it's like they definitely had some kind of intimate relationship going on in custody. And so they drive all the way to Holcomb, Kansas, and they get their supplies, and of course they're waiting outside of the clutter place. They want to hit them at night when everybody is asleep, right? So they get in the area and they wait for it to get dark before they do their attack. And I just call this scene It Starts, and we can go ahead and start that scene. But it shows Nancy is praying, and for me it was like, okay, this was probably a little bit artistic license on the part of Truman Capote, because what you're doing is you're clearly defining good, meaning this family that prays before they go to bed, right? Nancy's praying, pure, wholesome 16-year-old is praying, and then evil. These guys sitting out front talking about robbing them and no witnesses, right? So, I mean, it was a clear dichotomy of, and then the whole family itself, other than the son smoking a little bit in the basement, this, which is for, I guess he was 14, 15. I guess that happened, and that you want to look cool smoked because everybody smoked on TV, right? So everybody thought that was a cool thing to do. But this is a wholesome farm family from Kansas. It's good. They're all good. They pray before they go to sleep, and then these guys are evil, sitting in the car, waiting to go in there, rip them off, and murder them. Did you kind of see that scene as defining good and evil clearly?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, just at the beginning, from the very beginning, they show that the Clutter family, they're very involved in their church, and in fact, Mr. Clutter was being considered to be recognized as a top contributor of his church. I forget the title that they were going to use, this award they were going to bestow upon him, but yeah, it was a very, very, and of course that time in our country, and especially in the Midwest, the Bible Belt, I think if maybe not the majority, but a large population was very family oriented and very religious, and I think that's the type of family this was, a farming family that was very religious, and it's certainly the good versus evil here, or vice versa, I'd say.
I think the other thing, as they were driving to this area and they got in the area, they also started saying things like, look at all this grain, look at all this, I think they were pumping oil in the area, look at all this, implying that these are the wealthy, these are the people who kind of have it lucky, and I think we need to really get into when criminals, when you talk about criminogenic factors, they have this these impulsive actions and a sense of entitlement, right? I don't know if you interviewed people where you hear this sense of entitlement come out of them when they, because that's what I hear when they're driving there. That, well, these guys have all this, we're entitled to some of this, and we're going to take it from them. Did you kind of see that with these two guys? And do you see that? Was that kind of your experience when you dealt with people who were committing crimes and that resulted in a murder, whether intentionally or not? But it was this criminogenic thinking, impulsiveness, and a sense of entitlement.
Yeah, in fact, I handled a couple of murders where there was exactly that mentality, and two of which that I'm very familiar with involved family members. A daughter who feels like she's owed, and it's just, there's that type of mentality. I think it's mostly just justification for the evil deeds that they commit. But yeah, without a doubt, there's a mentality of that.
And I think for there's this whole whole challenge. How do you raise a good person so they're more rewarded by the work itself to get to the goal versus the belief that the end result and money is, because I remember when I was running a unit and morale was down a little bit. What your goal is you build up what you're doing as the importance. The monetary payoff for your work is good and it's secondary, but that really doesn't give you it doesn't reinforce or validate you as a person. I mean, it can temporarily, but it's the success of accomplishment. So, I mean, you got a Clutter here he's raising his family. That's a sense of accomplishment. He's got a successful farm. He's seen in a positive light in the community. So he's using hard work and determination to achieve and to feel good about his life. Whereas these guys have decided, well, just having, I mean, that's kind of how I look at it. Just having is the accomplishment, not the path to get there, right? Not this hard work you do to achieve, right? And I think lots of times criminals, they're missing that notion. Is like, it isn't just having, it is the path to get there. Do you understand what I'm talking about?
Yeah, and interestingly also is that they just took the word of a fellow convict that the Tutters were full of cash, and they never even tried to explore whether or not it was the case. They just, this guy they did time with, who apparently had worked for the Clutters in the past, and the Clutters employed a lot of farm help because they farmed a lot of land. So one of their former employees is doing time with Hickok, and he tells him about this farm and how rich this guy is, and how he's got all this cash, which a wiser person might have immediately said, well, how do you know? Have you seen the cash? Why would a farmhand see the cash of the owner,
Right.
As opposed just assuming that he had it? And especially in those days, but even today, believe it or not, because I live in a community now that's, a lot of farmers and ranchers, they do everything with checks. They don't use cash, and it's their way of keeping records. And you see an old cowboy, I guarantee he's going to have a checkbook in his breast pocket all the time, and he'll write a check for $1.34, at the grocery store. But so, they didn't even consider that the information might not be accurate, and that their efforts might not be fruitful. And yet they go there, and wipe out this lovely family, and I think they left there with like $50 and a pair of binoculars and a radio. Just a horrible, terrible, tragic incident.
Yeah, it's $43, right? So
Yeah.
so here, I mean, you don't even get a sense of accomplishment by actually getting $10,000, right? It's a
Yeah, they
failure,
failed at that.
failure across the board. So you're a
Yeah.
loser because one, you don't want to work for your money, and you're a loser because even when you try to go the easy route, you fail at that. You just
Yeah.
grind it out, and anyway, so they in this scene, it starts. They show them going in, and but they don't really show the murders at this point. It then becomes flashbacks, right, that we end up dealing with. But it's interesting. The morning after the murders, it starts out with church bells, right? There's evil, there's goodness.
Right.
The alarm, back in the day, the village would ring the church bells to alarm that bad things would happen. So so it really, and it's in terms of the symbolism of good and evil. I'm sure Capote's book had the same stuff in it. They used a lot of that, and so you hear the church bells ringing. You hear people coming over to get them, to talk to them, because they had stuff already planned in the community, and then they find that they've been annihilated. And I wrote the word family annihilation, because I really think that is. So you got the church bells ringing alarm, and then the discovery that this family has been annihilated, and the police start coming, and of course and this is really the question. So there's no fingerprints. There's no shell casings, and these guys are from out of town, and all they have is basically boot prints from the blood. I mean, that's pretty thin in terms of evidence to track these guys down, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a tough case from the beginning, and rightfully so. One of the first people that they consider is this boyfriend of the young girl, the 16-year-old girl. Thinking that he may have had some part in this, and they looked at him, and I think they kind of did what they did back in those days, bring him in and browbeat him for a while, and But they did have the evidence of these two boot prints, and one of which was in blood, and I think that helped them probably eliminate the boyfriend as a suspect. But you're in a community where this type of thing doesn't happen. So you know, as an investigator, right away you're gonna be looking at this saying who and why, and it's a big question. But you know, they solved this because the same person that put this all in motion, when he heard about the murder, he told his warden, and if it weren't for that tip, I don't know. You know, I don't know if the Kansas City Bureau of Investigation, I don't know if they would have ever been able to figure this out, track those guys down. There was very little evidence to work with. There, you know, it wasn't DNA back in those days, and like you said, no fingerprints were found. So it's just these two random boot prints, and you pretty much have to have, you know, an exemplar to compare and say, oh, okay, this is our guy. But how would you get to that point?
Yeah, I think the other thing is you're right on that, and we'll get into their Dick Wells is the name of the inmate that ended up snitching him off. We'll get into those things.
Floyd Wells, I think.
Floyd Wells. Okay, yeah, Floyd Wells. And but the only other thing is when these guys split up, and Hickok, I'm sure once he got in trouble again, because Perry Smith says that, yeah, there's still a witness, you. You know, he does eventually say that. He knows the weak link is him.
Right.
And since Smith allegedly did all the murders, and he acknowledged he did all the murders eventually, and there was only a matter of time for this guy gets caught kiting checks or whatever, which is what they end up doing. And when he's not with Perry Smith, that he would have rolled on him. So ultimately, I think it would have been solved, but it was hastened by the reward, because there was a big reward, and this guy Floyd Wells snitching on him. But you know, I really want to get into our next scene, and it's the you know, I have well, before we do that, let's see. So yeah, you know, high profile case. Yeah, so I really want to talk about a high profile case. So, you know, and this one, this would be this is a once in a lifetime event for investigators, like these guys, this kind of thing, handling a family annihilation case with this kind of attention, this kind of national media. There's a lot of pressure on investigators when something like this happens, right, Danny? Where you know, the chief's constantly asking you what's going on, the news media is constantly asking you what's going on, and they're a little loose with the news media. I was concerned they're giving too much information away, and I don't know if that was just for drama's sake or what actually happened at the time. But there's a lot of pressure on the Homicide Bureau and the homicide investigators in a case as big as this, right?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And again, you know, especially in that day, that era, and in the Midwest, you know, something like this just doesn't happen very often. So these investigators would be certainly really kind of up for their you know, defining moment, so to speak. You know, they've got to investigate a crime that they might not have much experience in investigating, you know, murder itself. So, you know, you still see that in some small towns when these things happen. And a lot of times the agencies involved will ask for assistance from the FBI or the state police, which is what the Kansas City cops did in this case. They had the Kansas Bureau of Investigation come in and investigate it. But yeah, it's that's when you're going to earn your pay.
So in LA County, the LA County Sheriff's Department and the LAPD probably they have the largest homicides in the county, right? And they, if I remember correctly, they're knocking on the door of 300 to 400 murders a year. Help me out there.
Yeah, it varies. When I was with Sheriff's Homicide, it was between 300 to 500 murders a year. It goes up and down. It was higher back in the you know, 80s, mid to late 80s, early into the early 90s, when the cocaine wars were on, and you know, gang warfare was off the charts. So it comes up and goes down, but yeah, LA County sheriffs deal with roughly 300 to 400 murders a year, and I would imagine LAPD probably has about the same numbers. I would say they're probably fairly equal. So
Yeah, and I just to clarify, we have a lot of smaller police agencies in LA County, very capable agencies, but they rely on the LA County Sheriff's Department to do their homicide investigations. And so just can you just talk about that process a little bit?
yeah, I mean, so within the county, I mean, there's I forget the number now, but there's um, scores of cities that rely on the sheriff's department for various parts of their law enforcement services. Some contract for everything from patrol on, and others just call on us for assistance in specialized type incidents. Whether they use our SWAT team for certain situations, or they call on homicide, and some of the agencies would use us for their routine murders. Others would call us only when they had a case that was going to clearly be above their level of expertise or even resources, because a red ball murder, a high profile type case, is going to just exhaust the resources of a small agency very quickly. Where the Sheriff's Homicide Bureau, we had 80 investigators, and even though that's spread thin, when you're talking about a county that's 5,000 square miles and over 10 million in population, it's still a great resource to draw from. And there's always the experience. One of the things I used to say with when I started working at homicide, I said, there's people that work at a small agency and they might make it to their little homicide bureau, but they don't really have the volume of experience that they have to draw from. And at Sheriff's Homicide, you're literally sitting in a room. I was sitting in that room with guys that had gone, far back, even beyond the Night Stalker killer case, and guys that have just investigated hundreds of murders. And so you always had that experience and knowledge to draw from, and there was a lot of that took place. A lot of guys would be grabbing a cup of coffee and walking over to some of the legends at the bureau, guys like Gil Creel or Mike Bumcrot, and sitting down with them and saying, hey, have you ever seen something like this, and what was your experience? And so you could learn a lot without having to learn it the hard way. You could draw from other people's experiences, and that was the great thing about working there.
Yeah, and if memory serves me correctly, we also had auxiliary units to do some legwork, right? Major crimes that could step in and help out, right? And we had surveillance teams that could pick up some of the grunt work that needed to happen, while you guys were focused on more specialized investigative stuff. So the sheriff's department came in with a variety of assets for smaller cities, and it was when in our area that we can apply those resources, and those guys are fairly experienced at what they do as well. So it's just a whole and so that you see that with here, it's obviously the state of Kansas is much larger than this small sheriff or it's a small town, and they can bring in those resources. And another great movie I'm going to want to do down the road, and I know it's fictional, but in the heat of the night, the small town with a sheriff and somebody comes from a big city homicide, and they just have so much more experience, and they look to the it's what guy you guys had an investigator named Stan White, right?
Yeah,
I remember him at a homicide scene. I forget what the homicide was, and he says, well, we just follow the evidence, right? So and so you guys don't get emotionally involved in a suspect. You get emotionally involved in the evidence. Let's follow the evidence. The evidence will lead us to, it's like the divining rod that gets you to where you need to go, right, to find the right guy. And the more experienced people are able to see past some of the pitfalls of emotion of crimes, right? And this one would be big. You want to solve it quickly because everybody's afraid, right?
Right. Yeah, and to your point also, when you have all the resources in the world, which I always felt like working with the sheriff's department, that was it. I mean, if I needed to get somewhere quick, I could have a helicopter land and pick me up and take me. I mean, with nothing more than a phone call. But you'd go to the various stations, East LA or Compton or South Central, and you had a case, and one of the first things you're going to do is say, who are my gang investigators here? And then all of a sudden they are with you and they're working with you because they know the gang's there better than you. And like you said, you call in major crimes. We need surveillance crews. I've sent them all over the place. You get a guy that's on the run, and you pull in your fugitive detail, and you get them going. So yeah, the resources make a big difference, and in that way, I think we were kind of spoiled with sheriff's homicide.
Well, I'll leave us one thought, and then we'll go for a commercial break, Martin. And that thought is, and I always said this, hey, you spend every dime necessary, but not one dime more. And I always felt with homicides and murders, that's when you open the purse to get it done, right? Don't waste your money on the other stuff, but you do spend your money when it comes to homicide. I think we're ready for Martina. Are we ready for our commercial break?
Yes, we are. And here we go.
Put your hands on top of your...
There's only one location on the internet where you can get it all. Movie, TV, and comic industry. News and rumor analysis. Official scoops from Geekosity magazine. Reviews and interviews. So, when you need it to be Sunday, there's only one place to go, mate. Pop Culture Minefield. Well, they're always talking nerdy nerd stuff. Right, jog on then.
We are back with Morning Coffee with the Chief. That is the first time we did this commercial on this show. So let me add to the commercial. If you're watching us on YouTube, remember to subscribe, like the video, share it with a friend, and of course, make a comment. If you are watching us Rumble on that platform, you follow us on Rumble, and of course, you like us, and you can comment, and you can share with a friend as well. Sometimes we get into subjects that get a little restricted on YouTube, and the more times you like, the better we can overcome YouTube's suppression of our content. You can watch any of these shows any day of the week. They got Military Mondays. They have a lot of other great shows, UFO shows, and yes, there are a bunch of nerds. I don't know if I fit in the nerd category. I'll have to ask the rest of the team if I'm defined in there as one of the nerds, but on this show, we do talk law enforcement. I guess I'm a law enforcement nerd. How's that, right? And we talk about the cop shows, and we try to give some real experience about police work and our own experiences and what is going on today. And let us get back to our movie. So the next one is the tip. And we kind of talked a little bit about this, and this is the tip that comes in from Floyd Wells. So, and they talk about, hey, after you left prison, so after Perry Smith left prison, Dick ended up bunking. I wonder if he got intimate with Floyd as well, but he ended up bunking with Floyd Wells and hitting him up about what was going on in his life, what he was doing, and developed this notion that there was a score to be had, right? So. And I didn't write it down, but I thought it at the time. No honor amongst thieves. That they may have talked about this, but as soon as that score went down, as soon as they murdered him, and they don't think this is the other part of the impulsiveness or criminogenic factors is they don't think about the end result. They don't think down the line after I do all these actions, what's going to happen. Sometimes they do. They want the notoriety of these things, but they don't really think about it down the road. And then the consequence, of course, are I'm sure as they're standing on the platform and the noose is getting put around their neck, they think, God, I wish I could have that decision back again, right? But the tip comes in and it goes to the warden. And it takes a while for it to get to Kansas, but it does indicate he lays out to his cellmate what he's going to do, right? He says, to Floyd that I'm going to do this, and which really shows premeditation, right? And he indicates he's going to kill him. He tells all this stuff long before it happens. So in reality, there was always two witnesses. For Perry, it's going to be Floyd and Dick, right? And there was, for those guys, there was always going to be this one witness who doesn't really have any allegiance to them. Because here's the deal: he takes all this information, he goes and does the ripoff. They do the ripoff, they do the murders, thinking they're going to get $10,000, and Floyd's not even part of this action. So there's a lot of reasons why Floyd is not going to be loyal to these guys. I mean, the only reason he wouldn't snitch is because he's still in prison, right? So talk about that. How often did you have a case where somebody in custody actually reached out to you, or your partners had somebody in custody reach out to you to help solve a challenging case? Did you ever experience that, or any of your partners experience that, Danny?
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's crooks are always looking for some angle, and whether it's to get out early to have a sentence reduction, or maybe even just to get a better place within the system to reside. But that, like you said, Wells is still in prison, and he hears about this, and I'm not sure what he angled for, but I guarantee you there was something. Well, I shouldn't say I guarantee it. Maybe he was just jealous and pissed off because maybe he felt that the Tutter case, the ripoff, was going to be something he'd be involved in. Maybe that's how they had planned it in prison. But he's still doing time when Smith gets out, or Hickok gets out and gets Smith, and they go and they do this crime. And to your point earlier about not really having the idea of consequences in their mind, all they thought about was having this money and heading to Mexico. That's where they had their sights set. But yeah, there's clearly there's always someone that's going to talk, and I think most crooks know that. And I wanted to say, the other part is that Hickok actually talked about writing some bad checks and getting put back in prison so that he could kill Wells. That he's a potential witness against them. And I think he used they're having dinner and he's got his fork, and he even shows, maybe I'll go in there and take care of him. So, that obviously was something that he considered and was on his mind.
Well, there's a couple things. I mean, once they get the tip in, the Kansas Bureau of Investigation does start tracking these guys down and identifying them and getting background on them. And here in this scene, they're actually talking to his dad, and his dad has given him his sorrowful life, where his mom was a rodeo rider, famous champion, and then she went on and became an alcoholic and wanted to sleep with other men. And Perry witnessed that. But it does, in the scene, it does say, "Hey, I taught my son right from wrong." Apparently not very well, and then he knows when he's beat. So so he did have a rough life, but this is the tip from custody that it broke the case earlier. Like I said, I think once Wells got caught for kiting his checks, he was going to turn on Perry sooner or later. So it was going to happen. It just happened sooner. And I think that's the other part I wanted to ask you a question about, because it was critical in the Ryan Clinken Broomer case earlier, because they put a $250,000 reward out to find out who killed Deputy Clinken Broomer. And so how important and how successful are the rewards for getting information to solve cases in your experience?
Well, I think that very often they're successful. You also have to be able to facilitate the result of offering a reward, and what I mean by that is a lot of times in one of these red ball cases, you'll have a whole task force involved, and there will be a number of people dedicated to do nothing more than to take the tips that are coming in and kind of set up triage with that, and try to go through and see what needs to be advanced to the investigators and what can be dismissed or set aside or whatever. Prioritize the leads that are coming in, but you'll get an overwhelming amount of response to any type of a reward, and you have to be able to figure out a way to sift through that and find the nuggets.
You know, I handled one case. I was the lieutenant. It was a gay bashing case out of West Hollywood, and it went on America's Most Wanted a couple of times. It became very political. It was the Trev Brody case, and you know, we basically had the evidence to figure out who they were, but we got so flooded by tips as soon as it hit America's Most Wanted that you know, we had all this white noise we had to deal with. We had to get through just to find those tips, because deputies at another station had already stopped and identified the guys and were suggesting it, but we're weeding our way through all this useless stuff. And I did try to, you know, I did assign some additional guys to just deal with the stuff that clearly was probably not going to be accurate, so that the investigators can focus on the better stuff. But I hear what you're saying, and so it's a double-edged sword. It helps a lot, but it also can become very intensive. And is there a point in time when obviously, like in the Ryan Clinton Bloomer case, the recent murder of the deputy sheriff, there's such an overwhelming support from the community and the politicians, and it was, I don't want to say it was nice to get the political support, but because we haven't really had a lot of political support for law enforcement in the last 5 to 7 years. But it was nice to see this outpouring, clearly a senseless murder of a deputy sheriff, outpouring support from at least the supervisor's office in that area, and then, you know, the president of the supervisors, or the whatever, Janice Hahn, is running against Alex Villanueva now. It's going to be an interesting race, but there was at least some support for law enforcement in that case. But it is sometimes the rewards are driven by an outpouring of wanting to get something done right now, and sometimes rewards are driven by all the leads are stopped. We need to do a reward to loosen things up. Is that accurate? Am I reading that wrong, or does that happen in these cases as well?
I'm not sure I completely agree with that, but yeah, I agree with you that it was nice to see some support coming in from the politicians on this thing, and that was good. The community, I think, is probably the most important part. You know, you don't hear from all the people that support police. They're not the ones they're not out marching saying we support the police. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But every community, has a base of people who, you know, they want to live peaceful lives, and they know that law enforcement is that thin blue line that stands between, you know, good and evil. So, you know, when something like that happens, I think people do kind of come forward in whatever way they can. In this case, it was very helpful in the case of the Palmdale deputy, because there was a vehicle description, actually a photograph from surveillance video that showed the actual vehicle, and they got that out through the media, and then there was a road rage incident. And the citizen presumably was able to say, hey, this may be, and that's my understanding, is that's how the case got solved, is that, you know, a citizen witnessed a road rage incident and recognized the vehicle, or thought, you know, it's very similar, made a call, and you know, things unfolded. So.
And you know, and the funny thing is well, two things I want to address in your comments, and you saw it in the movie too, is the community does, in tragedies like this, they come out to help, right? And it was always my experience, even as we were getting bashed by the media, or politicians were waffling in their support of law enforcement, the community, for the most part, the silent majority of the community, support us. You know, they're happy with us. I remember going to visit stations as a chief and talk to the city managers. Everybody's happy with us. You go to the community events, everybody wants to come and say hello. And it was really, you know, it's when you go to the community and then you deal with the media, it was really completely different, and there was clearly a disconnect, and it's the term they use in psychology, gaslighting. It's like the media was gaslighting everybody to believe that everybody was mad at the police, but in reality, they weren't. So, and so it's good to see in the movie the town came out for the Clutter family and were aghast and wanted to do everything they could to help the police. And we saw that the same thing with the Palmdale deputy Ryan Klingenblumer, who was murdered a few days ago. That the community came out and provided the information. I mean, that's not happening in Chicago, right? People are getting murdered in Chicago. Nobody's pulling any information forward. But here we do have the support in LA County. In my opinion, we have the support of the vast majority of the public. And the other thing I wanted to talk about this case is it's reality versus fantasy. I mean, the reality of pulling something off like this, and the challenges, the murder that is, versus the fantasy of being successful, because they do have Perry Smith. He keeps flashing back on these, he's pretending like he's playing the guitar in front of an audience. He's flat. They have this notion that they're going to be successful, and I always wonder, what were these people thinking? Clearly they weren't, right? What were they thinking? There's this fantasy that somehow it's just going to happen for them, right? And we know if you're going to be successful, man, it's what's the old saying? You put the nose to the grindstone and you grind it out, man. You work it, and success comes through hard work and it's not this it just doesn't happen to you. It's not like you're going to win a lottery ticket every day and things are going to be easy for you. You have to work at it, and that is these guys is thinking, that impulsive thinking, the fantasy versus the reality of how this stuff plays out, and that's challenging for me. And why did they ever think they were going to ever get away with this? I don't know if you want to comment on that or not, but
yeah, there's not much more to say about that. Yeah, I mean, in some ways, it just shows that that I think you mentioned it earlier. Just the laziness of okay, well, they've got this and I want it, so I have no way to get it by working hard, or I don't want to, so I'll just take it from them. And
yep.
That's a mentality of a criminal.
Yep. Yeah. So the next scene is pass me a match. Now, there's a couple things in the next two scenes that are curious to me, right? But these guys aren't done, right? So they're hitchhiking. They're back from Mexico. They sold their car to get out of. They went down to Mexico for a couple weeks to escape this manhunt where they're looking for him, right? And they sell their car, and I think they take a bus ride or whatever, and they end up hitchhiking, and they decide, or at least Dick does, that they're going to kill the next guy the next victim that picks them up, right? That's what they're going to do. And of course I pass me the match is it's the clue. Okay, go ahead and strangle him, right? And it's a curious thing, because I don't know if I'd ever pick up a hitchhiker. I mean, I just can't see myself doing it, particularly two guys like this. But they're going to compound really bad evil with even more evil here, right? And it's like, and you can tell Perry Smith is like, I'm in for a penny, in for a pound. I don't think I really want to do this. But so these guys, as Truman Capote tries to, in my opinion, normalize these guys or whatever, put a sympathetic face on these guys, they were going to try and kill somebody else, right?
Yeah, and I mean, I don't think it was until probably the 70s when people started saying, hey, don't pick up hitchhikers. Back in that day, it was common, and throughout the 60s, people hitchhiked across the country, and it was part of our culture, truthfully. But I'll say this too. One of my thoughts on that whole situation is that once the killing starts, it's, where do you stop? Because it, one parlays into another, and I think that's kind of the train that they were on.
I was thinking, when I thought of the Clutter murders, and you remember that guy named Tukey Williams, right?
Oh, very well, very
The head
well.
of what was the head of the I can't remember if he was Crips or Bloods. He was Crips, right? And
Yeah, he's. It's arguable that he was the founder of the Crips, and then it depends on who you listen to or which source, but it's either him or I won't be able to think of the name of the other guy, but there's two different.
Raymond Washington.
Yep, there you go, Raymond Washington. Good job, Chief. But yeah, it's rumored that Tookie Williams was the founder of the Crips, and he actually was right there in the area that I spent my patrol career in Firestone, and he was a evil, really, really bad man.
And I think one of the reasons why I thought of his story was one, he was portrayed in the end as this humanistic guy that wrote books to tell people to stay away from gangs, and we need to save his life and we need to not execute him. And he was executed in California. He was one of the last persons executed in California, since Newsom put his "we're not going to execute him" moratorium in place. But two of the murders that he was responsible for is he went and did a robbery, if I remember correctly, of a motel, and he killed, I want to say, a mom and a daughter, or at least a family that operated the motel. So Mr. Tough Guy, Mr. Muscles, Mr. gang leader murders two people for a small amount of money, two innocent, I think they were Asians, who are no threat to them. So he's purely evil, like you said, and that's the evil I equated these guys to. Didn't care. You mean nothing to me. I'm going to take what you have, and that includes your life. That's who I equated these guys to. So,
yeah, I could absolutely see that, and I thought it was a market that Tookie Williams had executed, but it could have been a motel.
It was two. He did two. One was a market where he shot a kid, a young man, and one was a motel where I think he killed two Asian people. I can't remember if it was a man and woman or two women. I can't remember, but yeah, it was. But senseless. We're not. So he's not even taking on gang members, right? He's killing innocent people for a few dollars or whatever he gets out of this, and it's probably not a lot of money. But yeah, once he kills one, then I kind of thought of that too. Particularly when it's the pass me the match, and of course he does end up in a car. They do get a mark, and fortunately the victim stops and picks up a soldier, and that saves his life, because now there's two guys in the car. One of them is somebody that can actually defend himself. But in the meantime, they're also doing an investigation into Dick Hickok, and they talked to his dad, and his dad made an interesting comment, which is relevant, I think, for anybody that goes into prison. He said, Dick, when he came out of prison, he came out mean, right? He came out mean. And I think sometimes they refer to prisons and jail cells as hate factories.
Gladiator school.
Gladiator school. And I think, personally, having overseen inmate programming in the jails for a while, I do believe there is room for improvement in criminal justice. To the punishment is keeping people out of society, away from society, but we need to find a way to break that cycle where I don't take ownership over the fact that these are broken people, but we ought to try and get them a little better before they get out, because that kind of, why not? We have them locked up. Let's give it a shot. If we're going to spend all this money, we might as well at least try to reform some of these guys, knowing full well, as I understand the data, I understand the science behind it, that only a small percentage will be changed. I don't know where that feedback's coming from. Are you hearing feedback too, Dan?
Yeah, actually, if it wasn't a live show, I'd say, hey, pause this for a second, because I think I've got someone outside using a leaf blower, and I'm like, oh my gosh, you got to be kidding me. So,
okay. But we're going to power on. That's life.
Okay.
That happens, right? And so anyway, so these can be hate factories, and that's kind of way I came away with that. And they also, while at their dad's house, they get the guns. So now they're building evidence They got the guns, they got names, they got shoe prints. They probably just need to get the boots that they have on, and they've got this case tied up. So they as investigators, they're doing their legwork too. They're checking the suspects and they're finding what they can find along the way to help build their case, right?
Yeah.
So here's the other scene that was really kind of interesting to me is so you got these two criminals who have other non-violent methods for getting money, right? They pass checks.
Right.
And you see the scene where Dick Hickok he does it, and he's actually pretty good at it, right?
Yeah, he's a con man, no doubt about it.
Right, and we do have con men who then become murderers, right? Because the score is so big, they're willing to do that. But it does demonstrate that he has the ability to rip off people without necessarily killing people, which further just is like, well, God, if you're this good at ripping off money, why don't you just stick with what you're good at? And why did you do that? I don't get it. Did you ever deal with petty criminals who they graduate up to homicide, whether knowingly or inadvertently during the course of their crime?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a progression with the criminal mentality, and I think a lot of hardcore criminals, I mean, they don't start out being a hardcore criminal. I think they start out with petty crimes, and I think that a great deal of them, they just become antisocial, and they feel like they can do whatever they want, and and as they mature and they learn, and then of course they go to jail and prison, they become more violent than they perhaps were when they first entered, and there's that progression.
It's like sometimes I just, for me, it was frustrating. It's like, man, you can make money, you can rip people off for suits, it's non-violent. Why didn't you just stick with that shtick, right? And I think it's the fantasy of the big score, for both of these guys. Both of these guys.
A lot of serial killers, not a lot, but I'm aware of several serial killers at least, who started out as sexual predators, and then after going to prison a few times, had decided that they would be better off killing their victim. That if the victim hadn't survived to testify against them, that they would have never been caught. So there's that rationalization also that occurs within the criminal mind, and they see it as this is my best option, which of course it's not. But
they're not going to stop their sexual abuse of others, so they're just going to increase our ability to get away by committing murder, and yeah, but so in the Night Stalker case, as I remember correctly, he started out just doing hot prowl burgs, right? And then he progressed to sexual assaults and murder. I'm not as familiar with. I just remember being briefed by Gil Carrillo in the academy when they talked a little, or patrol school when they talked a little bit about that and reading up on it. But these guys do progress, and part of it is, and I don't know if you ever had a case. It's the excitement of doing it, and then the excitement isn't quite as strong, so they have to ramp it up as well too. Is that something that you noticed or you found as well?
Yeah, I mean that's part of the psychology of it, and I do believe you're correct with regard to Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker. But of course, there was another element that Ramirez was pure evil. One of your comments. Oh, Danny. Hey, Danny Regalado commenting. But there was also the factor, the satanic factor with Ramirez, and he was a pretty bizarre individual. But
well, Danny Regalado, I challenged some folks on retirees, LASD retirees, to come on the show. I don't know if you saw it, Danny, but Danny Regalado saw it, and he said if I do a Joseph Wamba movie, that he would come on. So
hey, we've already done a couple. Where you been, bud?
I know I did we did. Yeah, I think I need to. I was thinking, God, did I do? I haven't.
Well, we did the Onion Field, and didn't you also do the New Centurions with someone?
Did I do it? That was with George C. Scott. I don't think I did that one yet. So that one's on my or the what was the other one? The Blue Knight. That would be a good one to do as well. With I think Bumper Morgan, right? And then
Yeah.
the new Satirian is with if I remember correctly, that George C. Scott is in the movie, right? With Stacy Keach.
Stacy Keach.
Yeah. So I'll hit Danny. Thanks for listening to the show again, and remember to tell all your friends to listen to the show and like the show and comment, and I hope you appreciate our dedication today. I'll try and do more of those as time goes on. I certainly don't want to see more deputy sheriffs get killed, but I can look back at historical things and talk about some historical cases. And I am looking for the ideal movie for you, Danny Regalado. And he says I'm waiting for a Danny Smith movie. So, do you have anything in the works there, Danny, that we don't know about?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. I get people to ask me, "Wait, when are they going to turn your novels into movies?" And I say, "Well, no one's knocking on my door, and I don't knock on their door, so it's probably not going to happen."
It's just somebody said to me, "Hey, you should write a book." I said, "Who wants to listen to some retired? I mean, heck, I can't even. Nobody wants to hear anything from cops these days, right? So, but maybe things are turning around because I'm." The head of I don't know if you've heard this. The head of the NAACP came out in Oakland and says, it's not racist to arrest bad guys. It's not racist. Yes. Yeah. This was about a month ago. It's not racist to arrest bad guys, and putting pressure on their Soros-funded D up there to do more. And then you saw Chicago's getting mad. So some of the hardcore Democratic states, their core constituent is saying, no, knock it off. These bad, because we both know if crime is allowed to run rampant, the people who deal with it the most are the people in the poor and working class neighborhoods, and many of those are communities of color. And these are the folks that are standing up and saying, knock it off. We and if it's I don't know if you read The War on Cops. There was another book put out by the Manhattan Institute. I read it as well recently, and it just gives all the data to show the hard work that we did over 40 years actually saved lives, a lot more lives, and than the inequity of people going to prison. I mean, what's the inequity of bad policy that caused people more lives by people of color? I mean, isn't that an inequity there? So if you have a policy that allows the murder of people of color, doesn't that lack equity too? I mean, that's the flip side of that argument that doesn't seem to, for whatever reason, the media doesn't want to address. But I want to get back to the movie. And Danny, I am looking for the ideal movie for you. You're on my mind. You're in my queue, and I will get you. And if you want to send me a note of some other victim you would like to have on the show with you, let me know, and we'll harangue that guy, and we'll get our gal and we'll get them on. But it's the stolen car and bad checks. What I really liked about the stolen car and bad checks thing is you're tripped up by your own behaviors, right? It was only a matter of time these guys got caught, because these guys aren't going to now go get jobs and fade into the woodwork and hide in broad daylight by being good, honest, hardworking people. They were going to commit crimes again, right? It was only a matter of time. And of course, they steal a car, and of course they continue bouncing bad checks, and of course they're going to end up getting picked up. And that is how it happens, right? You might have a lead on a suspect and maybe you don't have enough on a case, but he or she ends up in jail on something else, and you're able to go talk to him and start that interview and start drilling down on that suspect, right? I mean, that happens a lot, right?
Yeah, and it goes back to what you had asked about earlier with, basically, someone else in that they're doing time with, rolling over on them. And that's the thing is none of these guys can keep their mouths shut, so they go to jail and they brag about their crimes. Like we talked about Perry, did he kill a guy in Vegas? I don't know. Or did he just claim he did? But certainly, guys go into jail and prison and they brag about their crimes to basically to build up their street cred. And, the people's ears are always open, and there's always an inmate that's got an angle thinking, hey, this information could, benefit me in this way or that. So a lot of cases are solved in that manner, and that's why with homicide, a crime that has no statute of limitations. A lot of those cases you just have to be patient with, because sooner or later someone talks.
Yeah, and it's maybe the code of the streets keep them quiet for a while, but when you get arrested and you got information, you're looking at 20 years, whatever it is. That's why when people like our clearance rate on homicides is going on the sheriff's department, and there's probably a variety of reasons for that, and it seems to be something going on in California as well. And one of the things I say, when you restrict the authority of law enforcement, take away crimes that they can arrest for and stop for, increase the administrative burden, they're simply not beating the bushes quite as much, right? And people aren't flipping because they don't want the consequences of the crime. If you're arresting somebody for let's say sales, so for sales, right? Let's say they got 10 rocks and you arrest them for sales. They might actually just flip and give you the guy that did the murder or had the gun that and gave it to the other guy that did the murder. That's why some of these petty crimes, when we stop, because Gascon has stopped. I don't know if you know this, Danny, but he does not file any narcotics or drug or alcohol related crimes at all anymore. Zero. So if you get arrested for being under the influence of methamphetamine, for example, or possession of methamphetamine, which is now a misdemeanor, he doesn't file those cases at all. And those are the ones, those can be the linchpin for solving a case. So why is a clearance rates go down? It's my theory, and so I'm going to ask you as an expert and a homicide investigator, it's my theory that because you don't have these hooks into a lot of these suspects who have the threads of information that can solve a crime, that's one of the reasons why clearance rates might go down. Right or wrong on that one?
Absolutely correct. And I'll take it a few steps further. And there's when we were young cops, one of the things that I remember hearing, and you probably did as well, but I was told from my training officer or maybe people in the academy that, hey, you arrest a hype, heroin addict, you're taking a burglar off the streets. And another thing, because now you got this guy, we know that they make their living by doing burglaries so that they can support their habit. So you start solving other crimes, and those other crimes that you're solving matter to people, because there's nothing worse than coming home and finding that someone's been in your home. And it's not even necessarily what they took that matters. It's the fact that they were there. Can really be bothersome to people that are victim to that. But then you take it another step, and one of the principles we used to operate on in patrol was that every booking slip was just a tremendous amount of intelligence for later. So you didn't want to be lazy with your booking slip. You didn't want to just right across the back, phone calls waived, because you're missing an opportunity for intelligence. When you're booking a guy and you ask him, you get 3 phone calls, who do you want to call, and you write it on the booking slip. Well, you could just write waived, they waived is right to a phone call, or you can write down 3 different names and phone numbers of people, and someday that could be something that solves a murder or pulls in. You've got a guy that you're looking at for a murder, and he had an accomplice, and you start going through all of those historical documents, who he did time with, who he listed on his booking slip, who he was with when he was arrested. And that type of intelligence is what can crack cases wide open, So when those booking slips aren't being generated, and people's fingerprints aren't being taken, and when people aren't being convicted of other crimes and their DNA being taken when they enter the prison system and stored in the system, then you're lacking opportunity to solve more serious crimes later on.
So when you hear the social justice warriors out there criticizing law enforcement because their clearance rate isn't high and it's going down and they're just lazy and it's all the cops' fault, keep in mind that the legislature passed laws, like, for example, they got rid of loitering with intent to commit prostitution. Prostitutes are on the streets all the time. So if you don't get to have contact with them and make they know who's who in the zoo. They know who's doing what, right? Hypes are, if you're not prosecuting people who are hypes in possession of methamphetamine, they know who's who in the zoo because they're out on the streets. You're not solving crime. So when they relax these laws, when they are permissive, they don't file, they don't charge, or they just get rid of laws, you reduce the effectiveness of law enforcement. And I'm not a conspiracy theory guy, but I just think that the social justice warrior, I think the ACLU know exactly what they're doing. They're making it so expensive for law enforcement to get crimes. And then they could say, well, we should do it another way because look how expensive it is. And I personally think that's what they did with the death penalty. They made it so hard and so expensive to kill anybody. Then they say, well, look how expensive it is. Just let them stay in prison. And you know what the next argument is going to be? Well, look how long it is, how expensive it is to keep them in prison. We need to let them out. This is a game that they're playing. They're playing chess. They know what they're doing. And I just, like I said, I'm not a conspiracy theory guy, but it just seems like a pattern to me. Restrict their authority to do their job, add the administrative burden on, reduce their effectiveness, and then complain that they're not effective. That just seems to be what has been going on in the last few years, and the public needs to push back on that. And so let's get into the interviews because that's the next part. This is what Kansas Bureau of Investigation does here is they imply that these guys left a witness, right? And they're working on him. And they clarify in this that it's okay to lie to. I forget how I saw this. I think they did say this okay to lie to in an interview to get this outcome, and it is. You don't have to. You don't have to play by the Marcus of Queensberry rule. You're dealing with killers that don't want to talk, and you got two suspects who are involved in these murders, and you want to pit them against each other. I mean, I did another movie, LA Confidential, where they did that. So I've done a few movies where you see them pit each other, and they do that very effectively with these guys as well, right? And do you want to talk about that game where that they play where you try to pit two crime partners against each other?
Yeah, it's a pretty common tactic, and I think LA Confidential, they had a great scene where they had the ability to turn on the volume, so the other people can hear what's going on in the room, and he'd be in one room interviewing a defendant, and the other guy next door can't hear anything unless he hits the switch. So he would ask some other question that has nothing to do with the crime, but it would elicit an answer, a response that made it sound like he was cooperating and confessing. And the cop would hit the switch so that his crime partner would hear him, confessing, and then he'd go over and get that guy an opportunity to, get in front of it. But as far as the lying, it's absolutely a great tactic. It's perfectly legal. The only thing is you have to be careful that you're not going to take a step that is going to have the person revolt and think, nope, now I know that you have nothing because that didn't happen. They might not say it, but they know it. And I go ahead.
I was, as earlier in the show, they were releasing information that I was surprised they were releasing, like she wasn't molested, or they were giving out information. I go, why would I would think some of this would be kept closer to the vest, so that you can use it against and so they can't craft excuses. And I understand what you're saying. The lie has to be one that that they can't refute because they know all the facts. It has to be one that they can't refute. And what I also noticed in the interview, and this is, like I said, my very short time as an investigator, sometimes lies were very effective at pinning these guys in as much as the truth too. So you let them tell their lie, and then you start hitting them with the facts, right? And see how they change their lies too, right? So it's
and they were careful. I mean, to say that there was a witness, all that's going to put in their mind is uncertainty, because they can't know for sure that there wasn't. So that's a good safe lie to tell, because that they cannot absolutely know for certain that there wasn't another witness. And
Right.
and the person may not have even had to have been in the house. It could have been someone that saw them come and go. So it's going to put enough doubt in their minds that once they start feeling like you've got the evidence to nail them down, you're more likely to get them to start giving parts of confession. They might not want to tell the whole story, but they might start trying to say, well, okay, I might have been there, but I didn't do it, and turning on their partners and so forth.
Well, so first of all, Danny Regalado on my comment. Thank you, Danny. Reinforce. I need the validation that I'm right occasionally. He says you're completely spot on my comments, my previous comments. But the other thing that on the murder here, if it, I mean, Perry knows that Dick can always flip on him too, right? I mean, they know they're in. These are convicts. They know, and they also know what happened in the place. And I guess I wanted to back up a little bit as on these interviews and talk about the murders itself. I mean, in the movie, and I don't know if in the book, but I felt in the movie that that Perry felt jealous when Dick expressed interest in Nancy, right? And that might have been a precursor to the movies. Now, Perry does eventually, in these interviews, he does admit to killing all of them, right? He takes the full boat. But and the interesting thing about this is they have Floyd Wells' comments, right? Because I'm sure they have the comments where he said in the cell, "Yeah, we're going to kill him. We're not going to leave any witnesses," right? And then they have the fact that obviously no witnesses were left, right? And so Dick Hickok is going down, and you want to explain the felony murder rule, even if they decide he didn't actually kill anybody. Just explain what that means, because we got rid of it in California.
I was just going to say the felony murder rule was a wonderful law and very appropriate to have. But yeah, California, leading the charge in screwing up, the criminal justice system, they did away with it. But the felony murder rule, basically what that means is that if you're involved in the conspiracy or commission of a crime, a certain crime, enumerated crimes, and there is a death that results from that crime, then both parties can be charged. And an example would be, if you're the getaway driver and your guy goes into the bank and he's going to do a bank robbery and he decides to, shoot the security guard in the head. Well, you may not have signed on for that, but the fact that you signed on at all, you will be charged with the murder of that security guard as well. A more interesting use of the law, and perhaps one of the reasons California wanted to get rid of it, was we were able to actually convict, if there were two criminals, say two guys go into a bank and rob a bank, they come out of the bank and they engage in a firefight with police, and one of the bank robbers is killed. That when the felony murder rule was in existence, we could charge the other defendant with the death of the person that the police shot and killed, because if they hadn't agreed to commit this crime and took the steps to commit it, then that would have never happened. And to some people, that they found that to be an atrocious thing, but it was appropriate in my opinion. And
yeah, I mean, well, it's technically a homicide. In fact, they were killed by police, but the only reason they were killed by police, so I love it. I don't understand where California is going with this. Other states still have the felony murder rule. So all you red states, you're still okay. Blue states, hey, you got to listen to Danny R. Smith as he talks about this, and the chief, as we say, this is lunacy. We need to do reverse and go back in the other direction. And before we go on to the whole thing about Nancy, which I just kind of brought up, so in these interviews, they do hit him up with the footprints, right? Dick rolls, because they did have enough to where, okay, here's your boots, here's the footprints. And so they have enough to show, okay, stop lying, we got you. And of course, Hickok rolls on Perry, but Perry takes the whole weight in terms of committing the murders, which was, I still think this was a foregone conclusion. They had their 2 or 3 week hiatus where they were able to be free, but it was only a matter of time before they got caught. But that's what happened, right? They lie, and then you start gradually hitting them with that stuff to hit back on their lies, right? That's how you do
And
it.
yeah, and kind of going back to the whole, Wells going to the warden and putting that information out. That's a part of the investigation. That's a step in solving the case, but that in and of itself wouldn't hold up in court. I mean, it's basically hearsay evidence, and it may or may not even be introduced. But that's what gets the ball going in the right direction. And of course, you wouldn't want to go into court relying on, well, I was there when they conspired to do this. You'd want the evidence, and once they had the shoe impressions, then now they've got hard evidence. So that's when they've got them. That's when they can lock it down. And then, like you said, you're going to try to get one partner to roll over on the other, which, there's different strategies about how to do that. And then also different strategies on how that may or may not play out in court, depending on if their trials are together or, separate and so forth and so on, and what one defendant can testify against the other. But, you leave that up to the lawyers.
Yeah. Well, obviously, the Kansas Bureau of Investigation did a good job. These guys did flip. Like I said, I think it was a foregone conclusion. Hickok was going to flip on Perry somewhere when he faced some liability, because there is no honor amongst thieves, as we discussed earlier. Whether you get ripped off out of your share, or in Wells's case, I think they had $100,000. They had a pretty large reward for 1959 on this case, and you're thinking you're whatever, a loser sitting in prison, and you're looking whether it was 10,000 or 100,000, you're going to get a big payday, and all you have to do is turn in these two losers who actually in prison. I don't think these guys would have fared too well. You kill a whole family, including a 15-year-old and a 16-year-old. Yeah, somehow
Right.
I don't think they'll be in the royalty in prison, right? So
Right.
and so even though you might be the snitch who snitched on them, I don't think you get a pass there. But there still isn't going to be any love for these guys in prison if they got convicted of life without possible, and they were in prison for the rest of their lives. But but to get back to the murders, Hickok in the house does ask Nancy if she's ever been with a man. Now, I personally think this is what set Perry off on finishing this and getting out of there, because he didn't like that. Instead of just leaving, that's why I felt like there was some jealousy and some rage and something else going on with him, with Hickok expressing sexual interests with the girl. Did you get? I don't know if you got that. I know you read the book a long time ago, and I must have read it 40 years ago. But did you get that sense in the movie that triggered the starting of the killing?
Yeah, I mean, I think they set it up fairly well, just showing some of the previous interactions between Hickok and a couple of different women at different times, and it always pissed Perry off. It disturbed him greatly, and he confronted him, once or twice about it. Hey, what was the deal with that? And so whether or not that comes back to the underlying theme that we've kind of talked about with, was there a relationship and intimacy between those two, and was Perry upset about that, or was there some other part of him that just really didn't want to see a woman sexually assaulted? I don't know, but clearly that was a part of it. I think, talking about what happened in the house, I'll tell you the part that bothered me more than anything in this movie, and of course, we don't know for sure how that scene went down in the bathroom, but when Hickok goes in there and basically, says the daughter's coming with me, and the rest of the family just sits there and cowers, that sent me over the edge, just absolutely drove me crazy. And they prayed, and I'm a religious guy, but that's not the time to pray. I mean, no one would ever walk out of a bathroom with my daughter and they would have to kill me then and there. But
Well,
That's just horrendous.
I think obviously we're a different breed. You know, we can see what's coming, and we've been trained to do certain things. And if you're going to lose your life now, you know what I mean? Because if you compliant, was it you go out like a lion, or you're either going to be the sheepdog or you'd be the sheep, right? I
Yeah.
guess is what you're saying here. And I mean, I don't want to bash her, but any of those stuff. It's there are people who are, but I would thought, let's see, 59. He probably fought in World War II or something. Somebody, you know what I mean? I didn't understand that either. But of course, it's hindsight as being 2020. He's maybe thinking, just take the money and go, take the money and go. And I don't think the average person thinks they're going to kill us over money, right? But I did want to say a few things, and we got a couple scenes. I just this scene and the next thing I want to get into is it's us versus them. Kind of came out in this theme. Perry and Dick against them, but ultimately something else was said here. This had nothing to do with the Clutter family. What was going on here really had nothing to do with them in particular, right? It's what's going on. These guys, what their makeup and their relationship. This could have been any family. I mean, I think that's what creates the fear. This could have been anybody, right? It was the
Yeah.
Clutters, but it could have been anybody. Um, there was a comment made, and I forget who made it. If you have tears, this was in the courtroom, right? If you have tears to shed, weep not for thee, weep for those, weep for the victims. And I think I think it was Will Greer, the great actor Will Greer, who played the prosecutor in this case, and he said that. And so because this rolls into the where they're getting tried as well, right? And there was another comment made. Neither one of them would have done this alone. So two things. Right now we have this whole thing where we're weeping for the suspects in society. And this movie, even though it is an anti-death penalty kind of movie, that comment, in my mind, really frames where we should be at. If you have tears to shed, weep not for them, meaning the suspects, weep for the victims. What do you think of that comment?
Yeah, I mean it's appropriate, and it's true. You've mentioned that you think it's an anti-death penalty movie. I never got that out of it. After you say it, I can look back and say, okay, I can see where you would come up with that idea, and I don't disagree. It didn't pop out to me as that, but I see where you're going with that.
It was that came out in some of the critiques. I felt like it was that where they just kind of made, particularly Perry Smith, look like this vulnerable person, and I never saw him as a vulnerable person because you heard my comment at the beginning of the show. There's a lot of people who suffer bad things and they don't become killers.
Yeah.
He had free will. He became a killer, and the other one was neither one of them would have done this alone. I have read this on other things where you have two counterparts involved in a crime and they come together and they tend to be a deadly duo. Norris and Bittaker, those are the two Sunset serial killer knuckleheads. Right. That was said about them, although they were both vicious, people. So let's go into our final scene, and this is appeals and execution. And you mentioned it early on, Danny, that it took 5 years, which it seems like a long time, but in California, 5 years for
not to me.
Nothing. That's the only way you get executed in 5 years. Well, you can't do it in California in 10 years is if the guy doesn't appeal anything, and there's still automatically appeals, state-sponsored appeals that go along anyways. 3 times to the Supreme Court, which was interesting. I mean, I didn't do the research on the legal part of this as to why it went to the Supreme Court 3 times. And just to be clear, I don't want to execute innocent people. So I'm okay with some of these state-sponsored reviews and appeals just to make sure we're getting it done right. But I think sometimes it can go just a little too far. And then I'm also surprised. These guys seemed resigned to their fate, that they chose to appeal as many times as they did, right? That's the other part. And I have to believe that maybe part of this is the celebrity and attention they got in the case from Truman Capote that maybe inspired them to fight. I mean, I don't know if that's true or not. I don't know if that came out in the book. But yeah, what do you think about that? You think maybe the notoriety, now we're somebody, we killed these things, but we should be saved, because that's the other part that comes out. Well, you really are a victim. So, and you hear criminals say that, well, I was a victim. That's why I did it. It's no longer about your free will. It's about you being the victim.
Yeah, I'm not sure, but I would say that anyone who's facing the death penalty, regardless of whether or not they believe they, are destined to it, that they're going to do everything they can. They're going to fight for their lives, and hope that somehow, some way, that can be overturned. So it doesn't surprise me, the appeals, and of course, all the appeals are always driven by attorneys, and they get more and more creative, each day.
Okay, we're wrapping up, and I did want to make a comment. Martine says, I think Perry Smith was severely mentally ill. He could have manipulated Capote to make him think that too. And the one thing I want to say about mental illness, because it's coming up in the Ryan Klinken boomer case as well, a guy suggesting he's mentally ill. And as Danny knows, there is mentally ill where you're completely incapacitated and don't understand what you're doing. And then there's mental illness where you clearly know what you're doing. And I think right now, many of our social justice warriors have decided that any mental illness is mitigation for a crime. And I just don't believe in that. I think there are plenty of people who are mentally ill that don't commit crimes.
No, I don't mean. I didn't mean to convey the
Oh,
that I was
I know you did.
Anything. No, those guys, those two guys, they were both monsters.
I understand
There's
that.
No doubt about that.
And your comment wasn't taken that it's any kind of justification. What I'm saying is people beyond this podcast, social justice warriors, are tapping into the fact that somebody might have some mental illness or some behavioral problems and suggesting that those are mitigating factors and they should not be punished. I don't know if Danny, if you agree with that or not. I think there's ways to assess whether they know intent. And that is, we need to rely upon those to hold people fully accountable who are capable of forming intent.
Yeah, because I mean, by definition, crazy. If you go into a stranger's home and murder the family, you're crazy. But that doesn't mean that you can't appreciate the nature of your crime, and that's what it boils down to. Is it's one thing to have a mental illness like so many people do, and another to be mentally incapacitated to not even be able to appreciate the crime you've committed. Those are two very distinct, different things.
Yeah, crazy doesn't mean stupid, and crazy doesn't mean you can't form intent.
Now, in the case of how Smith is portrayed here, he knows what he did. He knows why. He implies that sooner or later that was going to happen, because there was nothing special about this family. I didn't know them. They just were there at the moment that I had the explosion, but he doesn't seem remorseful at all.
Now, he did make comments that were I don't want to say supportive of the family, but presented the family in a positive light. But I don't think he displayed remorse at all. So, and I just I make those comments because there is a move afoot today to justify or to mitigate behaviors by people who have some form of mental illness or behavioral problems, and to excuse them from their crimes. And I think we're going down the wrong path there. That was really why my comment is there. And but we are past the 2-hour mark. Look at that, 2:04. I survived. The worst aspects of my this vertigo stuff went away. So obviously the distraction helped. Danny, thank you for coming on the show. We'll stick around for a quick debrief. You can catch this show every Tuesday on Pop Culture Minefield on YouTube, Pop Culture Minefield at 8 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Remember to like the show, subscribe on YouTube, make a comment, and if you're watching us on Rumble, if you're not following us yet, remember to follow us on Rumble there, like the show there, make a comment. Do me a favor, write a letter to the governor about Derek Pettis denying his parole, and also look up what's going on with Ryan and Clinton Bloomer. I'm going to later on put something in the chats where you can make a donation for Ryan and his family. I know his dad very well, great guy, and it's tragic. I'll reach out to him in a couple of days. I know he's busy right now, but please do those good deeds for the day. And thank you for joining me, Danny and Martine. You can take it away.
Ma, I'm doing a show! Ma, I'm doing a show! Ma, I'm doing a show!